Faster than a fraudulent performance measure, stronger than a misplaced decimal point, able to leap complex compliance requirements in a single bound. It's Super Auditor! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Auditors Save the World, one audit project at a time, where we bring you thrilling tales of daring audits and brave financial reviews. Here, our heroes don't wear capes, but they do wield the power of empirical evidence. Brought to you by the pros at Yellowbook-CPE. In each episode, we interview those legendary auditors who have truly rescued the day. Stay tuned, listeners, because this is one story you won't want to miss. And folks, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your podcast app of choice. And now, here's your host, Lita Hart-Fanta.
The city hums with traffic. Footsteps echo on concrete, and danger hides in plain sight. From crosswalks to the corridors of City Hall, one watchful guardian keeps the streets of San Diego safe. This is Eduardo, by day, Chief Audit Executive of a great California city. By calling, protector of people who walk, drive, bike, and live their lives one intersection at a time. With a sharp eye on policy and a heart anchored in public service, he audits what truly matters: street design, traffic controls, safety programs that decide whether citizens arrive home or don't. His work doesn't just improve processes, it saves lives. So look both ways, listen close, and take heart.
I was in the city of San Diego. I was a city auditor there for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept reading in the newspaper and watching on the daily news how pedestrians were being killed or injured crossing city streets. It seemed to be a regular occurrence in San Diego.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough to not have a family member or friend who was injured by a car, but I felt that as a city auditor, it's an area that we should probably look at is pedestrian safety.
Oh.
So I came to my audit team and I said, we're going to audit pedestrian safety.
Wow.
And I said, I'm sick and tired about reading about citizens being killed or injured crossing city streets. There's something as an audit function that we should be able to look at and review. And my focus always in audits, what I've really enjoyed auditing was issues of health and safety.
Okay.
Anything that impacted health and safety of residents or health and safety of employees, we're going to go to the top of the list. And, I tended to give kind of vague directions, or I would bring up the issues to the audit team saying, look, this is the issue. This is a problem. It's the issue of pedestrian safety. And I want you to figure out how we can audit it.
Perfect.
So, the audit team kind of looked at me a little bit side-eyed and said, well, let me see what we can do. And so they went and did some preliminary survey. They did some interviews. And the audit manager came back and said, look, Eduardo, I think I have a way we can audit pedestrian safety and have an impact. So we're going to focus on engineering, we're going to focus on enforcement, and then we're going to focus on education. So I said, that's great. So they started field work. And what we had found out in terms of engineering is that the city of San Diego at the time, in deciding which intersections needed attention, was only using data involving two vehicles. So they looked at the intersections where two vehicles collided, and then they used that information and data to figure out which intersections needed repairs. And our audit team had actually found out that there were three simple fixes that cities could do to mitigate the risk.
Yeah.
One was painting broad stripes, like zebra stripes, on the sidewalks at crosswalks. Kind of think of Abbey Road.
Sure.
Two was installing countdown timers to let the pedestrian know how much time they had to cross the street.
Yeah.
And the third one was audible signals, so people would know and hear.
Sure.
We realized the methodology the city's Department of Transportation was using was data involving two vehicles. It wasn't really showing where the accidents involving pedestrians and vehicles was occurring.
Mm-hmm.
So they took and crunched those numbers and came up with a number of intersections that were being overlooked by the city, where problem intersections where there was multiple accidents involving pedestrians and vehicles over a course of time. And there were some intersections where there had been 5 or 7 or more accidents or incidents evolving. And that's the data that we had showcased to the cities that they should be using data analytics to decide where to repair or make improvements.
Oh, nice.
So that was kind of an impact there.
Yeah.
So the second part of the audit, which is still ongoing, is the team looked at the issue of enforcement. And they looked at certain violations that contributed to cars injuring pedestrians or pedestrians being injured, such as jaywalking, or more likely vehicles failing to yield to pedestrians at intersections.
Mm-hmm.
And then we looked at all the citations the police department had issued for a certain period of time, and we realized that very few of the citations, less than 1% of all citations, involved those type of incidents.
So it wasn't even part of their awareness.
No, and then we went out and did a ride-along, as auditors do, as they do field work and they do ride-alongs.
Sure.
And they went out with a traffic enforcement unit, and they were enforcing pedestrian safety issues, but it was only based on grants, it was based on overtime, and it was based on complaints. So in this case, they were looking at issues that weren't really related, or enforcing issues that weren't really related to pedestrians, but whatever people were complaining about, and also areas where there wasn't high pedestrian traffic. And again, we suggested and recommended that the police department use some data analytics and conduct enforcement operations where these accidents were occurring.
Gotcha. Nice.
And then the third part dealt with education, where both pedestrians and drivers needed to be educated in terms of crossing the crosswalk, reminding vehicle operators to yield for pedestrians, reminding pedestrians not to jaywalk, cross at the lights. So those are that audit, and we made a number of recommendations that the administration agreed upon. I know that the office of San Diego recently did a follow-up investigation audit to the previous one we did in 2016. So it's still a hot topic issue in San Diego, and I know that a lot of other cities still struggle with that issue. So that's probably one of my favorite audits that I've done.
I love that. What did they do for education? Was it PSAs? Was it billboards? Was it adding it to the driver's exam? What was it?
It was PSA, public service announcements, and maybe having those mobile electric announcements that you can move and tow to specific jurisdictions or specific streets where you can have signage and say, slow down for pedestrians.
Wow, super. So when you presented this information I assume you're reporting to City Council. Is that the way your government works?
Yeah, we were reporting to the City Council, specifically to the Audit Committee, and then ultimately to the Council. Mm-hmm. It was well received, and I know that there are certain community organizations that were really interested in the report. Yeah. We went and presented to them as well. So it was one of the more positive reports of really trying to get the city ahead of the curve and addressing issues before they became problems.
You saved lives. Yeah. You've saved lives, Eduardo. That's fabulous.
So by far, my favorite audit.
Yeah, that is a great audit subject. What are some of your other favorite audit subjects?
And now, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Yellowbook-CPE, the heroes behind the jumbo bundle of self-study courses. With a 1-year subscription, you get access to over 180 hours of top-notch CPE content. Dive into thrilling tales of agile, IT auditing, fraud, and internal controls. All courses carry NASBA's quality seal, so you know they've got the superpower of trustworthiness. Just click the link in the description to sign up. And now, back to our story.
What are some of your other favorite audit subjects?
Another one that probably didn't get a lot of attention, it's right before I left San Diego, we did one on human capital. Okay. If you think of municipal governments, and all governments are really a human capital driven organization. Sure. It takes employees and takes people to deliver services. Mm-hmm. So I felt it was an important issue to look at the workforce to see how the city recruited, onboarded employees, how they've rewarded employees, and ultimately how they, discipline employees. The whole issue of human capital's employees was really important.
Wow, that's huge.
So we kind of started out that first project. It was towards my end of my tenure where we did an all-encompassing survey of employees and identified several issues. Oftentimes at that point in time, public safety was saying that they were losing a lot of police officers. But when we looked at the actual percentage of employees, there was other classifications that had higher vacancy rates, but they didn't have the attention that public safety gets. And if you looked at the percentage of officers by the number of police officers in the department, it's a lower percentage. So oftentimes, public safety is really good at advocating for themselves, creating alarming statistics that get people's attentions. But if you look at it in an objective standpoint, that number of officers compared to the total population of police officers is probably a low percentage. There may be other classifications of other employees or categories of employees that have higher vacancy rates that have an impact. Engineering, other technicians that, don't have the same advocacy.
Okay. So that was being done when you left, and you don't know where the results of that are right now.
No, I know that they did several audits. They did pay equity as a result of that. They did other additional audits of disciplines. So again, it's an issue that auditors need to look at. Keeping in mind that we're a human capital driven organization. It takes employees to deliver services, and it's the employees are the most valuable assets that cities and municipalities have.
Beautiful. When I was looking at your biography today, I noticed that you studied public affairs, I believe, at the LBJ School at the University of Texas in Austin, which is my alma mater, and I teach there every once in a while, which is really cool.
To me, I think the LBJ School played a really important role in how I viewed auditing. Because at the end of the day, what we're auditing and evaluating is policy. How policy is developed and how policy is implemented is very important, and it's a focus of the programs that we're auditing.
Right.
Because they're all based on a specific policy at the direction of the elected officials.
Right.
So, having that strong policy background has been extremely helpful to my auditing career.
Yeah, sure. So let's take that policy background. How would that background apply to the pedestrian issue? Like, how did that shape your view of what you were looking at there?
If I view issues, for example, public safety,
sure,
or pedestrian safety from a public policy perspective,
right?
There's clearly a role for the city council, elected officials to establish programs to solve a policy issue. And oftentimes, the council sets their policy goals when they adopt their budget.
Right.
But if you look at pedestrian safety, there isn't a department, there isn't a line item in the budget that says pedestrian safety.
True.
There's, Department of Transportation, there's traffic enforcement and police department, but there isn't a line item in the budget that says pedestrian safety, and this is what we're committing. So having a policy background allows you to kind of look at these issues, cut across various departments, and kind of formulate a response or an approach to study those issues. And there could be and should be a policy that can be developed with the funding tied to it to enact changes.
Beautiful. When you're looking for staff for your team, what stands out to you? What makes you go, that's my person right there? What are you looking for?
Sir, I'm looking for, at least people with various different backgrounds. Oftentimes we tend to get, a group think, and we tend to go back to the same policy programs. Having a very diverse background of experiences, education. I had people in San Diego that worked for me. There were social workers before. Some of them wanted to become doctors, data scientists, different schools. But I think the key, what I'm really looking for, is I'm looking for individuals that are problem solvers.
Yeah.
I'm going to challenge them, and I'm going to challenge them with a policy issue for them to tackle, and they're going to go back and think about the best approach. I'm not going to tell them how to audit or what to audit.
Right.
But I'm going to challenge them with a policy problem that I think needs to be addressed for them to be able to come up with ideas and think on their own. How to approach it is really the key. Being inquisitive, willingness to learn, and having a strong analytical framework is important.
Yeah. So how do you screen for that when you're hiring people?
It's, you're looking at your background, you're looking at what they've accomplished in their past, you're looking at their willingness to learn and how they're approaching, various problems.
Yeah, some people are not very naturally curious, are they?
No, no. Some people, want to, they come from organizations where maybe the audit steps are handed down to them and they're very specific and kind of, we call it, audit by paint by numbers.
Right. Check, check,
you know,
check.
do this audit step, interview these 5 people, ask these 10 questions, and don't color out the side the lines. But if you're willing to ask questions and pull that thread, oftentimes it's the willingness to kind of go a little bit deeper. It's going to yield, the key issue that you ultimately write about.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So one of the issues, of course, with curiosity is that you can keep being curious for years about big topics. Like let's take
Right.
foster care, medical care, whatever. And so how did you keep your team on track to finish projects? What kind of methods did you use as a leader to keep them moving forward?
Well, that's a really good question. And that's, I think, a lot of auditors and city auditors and how to be engine really struggle with keeping audits in focus. And I think having, strong deadlines and being committed to it. And I see the tendency now that, we tend to have, we've not just our office, but offices throughout the country are hiring very bright people. I mean, with this tremendous analytical skills, they could do really sophisticated analysis, but oftentimes what I see or what I fear is that we're forgetting or neglecting to keeping it simple. We try to overcomplicate some of our analysis, and it might be better served just keeping it simple and straightforward. And that's one way to kind of rein things in and not trying to take a big bite of the apple, being very mindful, being very strategic what you're tackling. You can't look at this program and audit it from cover to cover. It's going to take you, a ton of hours. But if you can do a part of it today, another part next year, and kind of more digestible chunks.
Right. So, can you give me an example of a audit where it was really broad and then you helped the team narrow it and made it simple so maybe they'd gone off on a tangent with too many analytical whatever they were doing, data analytics. They're like, well, let's do this. Let's do a survey. Let's do whatever they were doing. And you're like, hey, you got an example?
Yeah, one that comes to mind is when we did early on is how the city, San Diego was filling potholes.
I remember that story. I actually used that in my classes. There was an article about that I read by the San Diego...
The Union Tribune or Voice of San Diego?
The Voice of San Diego, right. And what the city was doing was misreporting how many potholes they had filled. Like if they just went and looked at it, they counted it as done. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that was something really similar, and every year, the mayor would come up and say, this year we're going to fill 15,000 potholes, and, people would stand and clap. And then next year they'd come back, we're going to fill 18,000 potholes, and people would clap. But in reality, we shouldn't be clapping for filling potholes. But the audit team came up with a very streamlined approach. They kept it really simple. They looked at how the city was filling potholes, which was complaint-based, and they came up on their own with some methodology that they had borrowed from a book. I Don't Make Widgets or something like that.
All right.
And they realized that if they grouped pothole complaints by district and saturated district per week, they could cover more potholes.
Okay.
Address potholes before people needed to complain.
Okay.
And it's not really, it's not rocket science. It's because I think if the mayor had told the Department of Transportation engineers come up with the most efficient way to fill potholes, they would have come up with the same approach. But oftentimes policymakers are saying, hey, we want this quota to be met, and people are meeting that quota.
Gotcha.
And not being very strategic.
Okay. So preventative rather than after the fact meeting this number. And then the city employees were under pressure to meet that 18,000 goal. And so they ended up kind of squirreling the numbers to meet mayor's goal. Okay. That's brilliant. That's really great. That's really great. Well, what would you tell a new auditor? What would you share? What's career advice for a new auditor?
So, I think what the advice I would say is, you have to, treat this job as your profession. It is a profession. There's certifications there. And treat it seriously like a profession. be eager to learn, learn and read constantly, not just about audit techniques, but also about policy issues, about what other issues are happening in other government organizations, in other states and other countries. Always be hungry to learn about, municipal government and the services that they deliver. And also, again, treat it like a profession and be patient. And oftentimes, there's times where they want to be promoted, they want to be management, but they don't have enough seasoning. That'll come in time. But, having a strong foundation, analytical skills and strong foundation in writing, that's a given. But that thirst and willingness to learn and really to think outside the box, and be also, most importantly, committed to public service.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining us on this adventure. We appreciate your loyalty. Take a moment to subscribe and share this podcast with all your audit allies. And don't miss out on Yellowbook-CPE's upcoming webinars. Because every superhero needs their training, and Yellowbook-CPE offers continuing education that's relevant, convenient, and as thrilling as the fight for justice. Until next time, audit on!